Almost everyone has heard the names of some Chicago gangsters at least once, as they've often been the protagonists of movies and TV series. Most people will remember Al Capone, who was portrayed on the big screen by Robert De Niro in Brian De Palma's The Untouchables, while others will remember John Dillinger and Michael Mann's film, where Public Enemy No. 1 was played by Johnny Depp, and some may even remember Sam Giancana. He made a brief appearance in Martin Scorsese's The Irishman and several other lesser-known films. But no one remembers Louis Alterie, the real cowboy among gangsters. He wore a cowboy hat and carried 2 Colt revolvers. He owned a ranch in Colorado. He even had a nickname suitable for a villainous gunfighter from a western. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Want to know more? Then meet Louis Alterie on the other side of the law. Before you continue watching, I'd like to ask for your financial support of the channel. At the link in the description, you can find my store-branded merch with exclusive prints designed by me. If you have the opportunity and you like something, please buy it, so you can help the channel to develop. Thank you in advance, and enjoy your viewing. There is one curious legend about Alterie. In the popular imagination, the Thompson submachine gun, or simply the Tommy gun, is closely associated with gangsters. No movie about them is complete without this truly legendary weapon. And believe me, the filmmakers aren't exaggerating. It's believed that it was Louis who popularized the Tommy gun. Ranch owners often used it to shoot wolves, which were a real nuisance to cattle ranchers in Colorado. The Thompson did an excellent job. Alterie himself owned a ranch, so upon his arrival in Chicago, he spread this valuable information among criminals. After the Tommy gun entered gangsters' arsenals, it was given a new name, the Chicago typewriter. It's strange that Hollywood filmmakers have overlooked such a colorful and vivid character. An entire trilogy could have been made about the criminal life of Louis Alterie. Let's start at the beginning. Before Alterie became part of the crime world, he was known as Leland Verrain, the son of Charles and Mary Lincoln Brown. Officially, Leland was born in August 1886, but his death certificate lists a different date, August 1885, and the 1900 census lists 1891. Verrain's father had French roots and possibly some Spanish ancestry, was a distant relative of Napoleon Bonaparte, and owned a ranch in Hell Hollow in the Mariposa Valley of Northern California. His mother was Irish. The couple had 10 children, including Leland. Verrain's early years are shrouded in mystery. Not much is known. He attended school in Lodi, California, performed as a rodeo rider, and boxed. Leland was ideally suited for the latter. He was 6 feet tall, about 183 centimeters, and weighed about 200 pounds, or 90 kilos. Verrain performed in the ring under 2 pseudonyms, Louis Alterie, under which, as you may have guessed, he later entered the criminal world, and Little Hayes. However, in the news reports and various documents, he was called by many names: Jack Verrain, Diamond Jack, Clyde Hayes, Frank Ray, Lou Alterie, State Alterie, Madison Alterie, and others. Before moving to Denver, Colorado in 1920, Louis allegedly joined the police force of a small town called Venice near Santa Monica, which was later absorbed by the sprawling Los Angeles, and even rose to the rank of lieutenant before leaving the service in 1916. His gangster friends would joke about this for a long time to come. In Denver, Alterie met his wife, socialite Mabel "Mamie" Hayes. He married her fairly quickly, and they moved to Los Angeles together. In 1921, a year after Prohibition came into effect, Louis, aged 35, went to Chicago, a city where gang fights, turf wars, and murders were a daily occurrence. He was too old to be a gangster, but he fit right into the world where violence was the norm. For example, in 1919, Chicago was engulfed in mass riots sparked by interracial conflict. This event was also known as the Chicago Race Riot. 38 people were killed and about 500 were wounded. Meanwhile, the so-called Aldermen's Wars for control of Little Italy was in full swing, which began in 1916 and ended in 1921. Simply put, 2 local politicians with ties to organized crime couldn't agree on how to divide power, and more than 30 people were killed in the struggle for control. This was normal for Chicago. Local gangs were constantly at war with each other and with the law. In 1924, writer Herbert Asbury claimed that there were 15 gangs in America's then second-largest city, which had a population of almost 3 million. However, a sociologist from a local university named Frederick Thrasher claimed that between 1923 and 1926, there were 1,313 gangs, with a total of over 25,000 gangsters. He provided a detailed map of the city to support his thesis. So Alterie quickly joined a gang led by Terry Drugan and Frankie Lake, with whom he robbed jewelry stores and ran gambling operations. A year after moving to Chicago, a drunk Louis got into a fight with a man named Charles Strauss in a nightclub and shot him during the brawl. Naturally, Louis was arrested and taken to the police station, but he was soon released. Strauss, upon learning who Alterie was connected to, dropped all charges. Something similar happened 6 months after the nightclub incident in June of the same year, 1922. The authorities arrested Alterie, his wife Mabel, and Drugan on charges of stealing $25,000 worth of jewelry from the Green Mill Gardens restaurant and nightclub. As you might guess, they too decided not to press charges. Alterie eventually left Drugan, but it's not clear where, when, or how Louis joined the Northside Gang led by Dean O'Banion, the main rival of the gang that Al Capone would later lead. Whatever the case, Alterie quickly became close to O'Banion. Among the gang members was World War I hero Samuel Morton, nicknamed Nails. After spending time with Louis in Colorado, he became more familiar with horses and upon his return to Chicago, developed a passion for horseback riding. Then, one Sunday in January 1923, Morton and other gangsters were riding horses in Lincoln Park. During the ride, a horse got spooked, threw Samuel to the ground, and kicked him in the head, killing him instantly. The story goes that Alterie, along with George Bugs Moran, Earl Jaime Weiss, and other members of the Northside Gang, stole the horse from the stable, brought it back to the crime scene, and shot it dead. While working for O'Banion, Louis continued to cause trouble and evade punishment. In 1924, he nearly killed a lawyer and his wife in a car accident in Lincoln Park. Although Alterie fled the scene, he was found by the license plate number and not punished. A little later, in August, Louis and his drunk friends opened fire in a bar and tried to kidnap 2 police officers who had responded to a call. Unfortunately for the gangsters, another officer who was there in plain clothes prevented them from finishing what they had started. He even shot one of the gangsters, but the rest escaped. After several years of court proceedings and amnesia on the part of important witnesses, justice once again failed to catch up with Alterie. It did not catch him even when a grand jury indicted Louis for his involvement in a theft organization. He was part of a conspiracy involving the former Cook County prosecutor to embezzle $500,000. In the same year, Louis became president of the local branch of the Chicago office of the Theater and Amusement Janitors Union. He would hold this position until his death. Around the same time, Alterie, along with Johnny Torrio, who had invited Capone to Chicago with Dean O'Banion and other gangsters, had interest in the Seabens Brewery on the north side of Chicago. But today, we're interested in another part of the story related to this enterprise, which will lead to some tragic events. One of the co-owners of the brewery was O'Banion. One day, a police contact informed him of an impending raid. Knowing that Johnny had a criminal record for violating prohibition, Dean decided to take advantage of the situation and eliminate his main competitor in the bootlegging business. What's more, they'd already had a simmering conflict at that point. To do this, he sold his share to Torrio before the police raid, thereby setting him up. As a result, Johnny was arrested and sent to prison for 9 months, and he was also forced to pay a fine of $5,000. With this act of betrayal, O'Banion signed his own death warrant. Dean owned his own flower shop, where he occasionally worked. In early 1924, for example, his shop supplied wreaths and floral arrangements with more than $20,000 for the funeral of Frank Capone, Al Capone's brother, who was shot by police in April during election clashes. On November 10, 1924, O'Banion was in his flower shop selling floral products. On that day, a huge crowd, most of whom were notorious criminals, were on their way to the funeral of Mike Merlo, the head of the Sicilian Mafia, who had died 2 days earlier of an unusual cause for a gangster, cancer, and not an overdose of lead. A car pulled up to O'Banion's store that day. 3 men entered the flower shop while the driver waited for them in the car. Nothing foreshadowed any trouble. He greeted the visitors as honored guests. While one shook his hand, the other 2 pulled guns from their belts and shot him. O'Banion's funeral was huge. Rumor has it that 40,000 people came to say goodbye when his body was laid out at Sparbaro's funeral home. 5 municipal court judges and at least 1 local councilman were at the memorial service. The funeral procession consisted of 24 cars, each filled with expensive wreaths and flowers. They were followed by literally blocks of private cars carrying mourners to the church and burial site. According to various sources, 10,000 people either watched the procession or attended the ceremony itself. The coffin cost $7,500, the funeral itself cost $10,000, and the exact amount spent on floral tributes is unknown. Louis Alterie was one of the 6 people who carried O'Banion's coffin. On that fateful day, Dean's friend and bodyguard had left him alone because he was recovering at home after a heavy drinking session and suffering from a hangover. This is not surprising for someone who spent half his life in an alcoholic haze. However, there's a theory that the killers knew Alterie was absent, which is why they were able to enter the store so calmly and do their job. Although Louis later became enraged, challenging him to a gunfight, it may have been just a smokescreen to divert suspicion. The truth will never be known. Shortly after leaving Chicago on February 22, 1925, Louis once again got drunk and caused a disturbance. Detectives arrested him, but Alterie was soon released on bail and left town. He returned to his ranch in Colorado. One version of the story says that Bugs Moran convinced Louis to take a break from the business because the Northside gang members were growing concerned about his reckless behavior after O'Banion's murder. Alterie's arrest came in the same month that Torrio left the Chicago outfit. He was seriously wounded in a shootout and decided to retire. In Colorado, Louis started a new life of luxury. If in Chicago everyone called him Two Gun because of his habit of carrying 2 revolvers, here he was given a new nickname, Diamond Jack. He wore precious stones worth between 15 and 20 grand on his belt buckle, watch, chain, and numerous rings. The latter often served as improvised brass knuckles when Alterie used his fists for any reason, or no reason at all. To this list should be added huge Stetson hats, a cream-colored Cadillac with Texas Longhorns on the hood, and the habit of showing off with a thick wad of bills. After selling his first ranch near Sedalia, Louis bought a second one in April 1926 near Glenwood Springs, 200 miles west of Denver. In the meantime, he divorced his first wife, Mabel, and soon remarried to Erminie, the daughter of Denver crime boss Mike Rossi. The wedding took place in Philadelphia. In 1927, Alterie shot his own brother with a shotgun during a drunken quarrel on the ranch. Louis was lucky. His brother recovered, licked his wounds, and did not press charges. Until 1930, it's not known what Alterie was doing, but most likely the same thing he always did. Drank, beat people up, shot guns, broke the law, and then drank, beat people up, shot guns, and broke the law again. Louis attracted the attention of the police in 1930. He was arrested for opening fire on fishermen on a lake. Alterie was also suspected of several kidnappings, including the high-profile kidnapping of the 20-month-old child of famous aviator Charles Lindbergh, although this happened in New Jersey, far from where he usually operated. Louis periodically traveled to Chicago to work with the Theater and Amusement Janitors Union, which he had headed for many years. Each time, he stayed away from the Northside Gang and their activities. But sooner or later, all good things come to an end, as does the patience of the authorities. On November 7, 1932, while heavily intoxicated, Alterie opened fire at the Denver Hotel in Glenwood Springs. He wounded 2 people and severely beat another. He was convicted and found guilty, but instead of a prison sentence, Judge Shumati sentenced him to banishment from Colorado. Alterie and his wife finally left the state on February 1, 1933, and moved to Chicago. In October of that year, the police suddenly raided Louis's office in Chicago, arrested him after a search, and charged him with employment fraud. The scheme was simple. Alterie found people who urgently needed work, took money from them promising to help, and then cheated them. But he managed to get away with it again. However, after moving to Chicago, Louis made one fatal mistake. He became too interested in the Moving Picture Machine Operators Union, which belonged to the Capone gang. By that time, the union had also undergone serious changes. In 1931, Al Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison for tax evasion. Frank Nitti became the new boss. Alterie's actions attracted Nitti's attention, not immediately, but eventually. It all happened on June 18, 1935. Louis lived with his aunt in an apartment on the 6th floor of the Eastwood Towers apartment complex, where they had moved on April 1st. At around 8:30 a.m., Alterie and his wife went downstairs. Erminie headed for the car. She was supposed to drive her husband to the union office in the city center, and Louis followed her out of the building. He took a step toward the car, and at that moment, shots rang out from across the street. According to witnesses, Alterie turned abruptly, waved his arms above his head as if trying to ward off an annoying insect, and fell to the ground. He was rushed to the hospital where he died on the operating table at 9:45 a.m., never regaining consciousness. However, some journalists claimed that Louis managed to say to Erminie, "Darling, I think I'm dying," as she held him in her arms. He was hit by a total of 15 pellets, 9 in the head and 6 in the left shoulder. The killers followed the same pattern that Alterie and Jaime Weiss had created or perfected. It was called the rented ambush. First, observers studied local newspapers, guest houses, and residential buildings in search of an apartment that could be rented near the target's home or place he or she frequently visited. Once a suitable apartment was found, they booked it and then moved in, turning it into a sniper's nest. The killers waited patiently, working in shifts until the opportunity arose to take the perfect shot, without warning and with enough time to retreat before the police arrived. On July 9th, the criminals settled in a boarding room directly opposite the main entrance to the Eastwood Towers. They moved into an apartment on the first floor, registering the lease under the name Sullivan, and began surveillance. As Erminie will later recount, a few days before the assassination, someone called them. An unknown voice on the line said, "The angel of death will come for you if you don't get out of here. The syndicate wants the union." To this day, it remains unclear whether this was a threat, a warning, or something else. After the hit, the killers left their ambush, hiding through the backyard, and drove away. They left a shotgun and an unused .351 Winchester rifle in the apartment. The police never found out who was involved in Alterie's murder. 5 days later, Louis's funeral was held in Glendale, California. It wasn't as lavish as those of O'Banion, Frank Capone, or Mike Merlo. Only 39 people attended, including 16 women. Alterie's 86-year-old father also came to say goodbye, but his mother did not show. Louis was buried in an unmarked plot in Forest Lawn Memorial Park under his original name, Leland Verraine. Although no one knew for sure why Alterie was killed, senior detectives and state prosecutors said that tragedy had been waiting for him for a long time. Newspapers spread rumors that Louis's murder was motivated by a struggle for control over 2 labor unions. One was already under his hand, and he had his eye on the other. According to another version, Alterie was targeted out of revenge. In 1931, he testified against Al Capone's brother, Ralph, in a tax evasion case. There's also another highly dubious version. It says that Louis once tried to get involved in shady deals in Denver, but was caught and became a government witness. Somehow, he was connected to a man named Harry Schechtel, a broker accused of bond fraud along the 23 other suspects. On the eve of Louis's murder, someone called Harry and warned him that if he did not get the investigation dropped, he would suffer the same fate. Considering that $500,000 was at stake, and rumors were circulating around town that Alterie had leaked information to the feds to get rid of his competitors, it's no surprise that someone came after Louis in the end. By Chicago crime standards, Alterie had a long life. Due to his difficult personality, violent temper, and addiction to alcohol, he was constantly walking on a knife's edge. It's surprising that he didn't meet his end in one of his many drunken brawls or shootouts. But in the end, Louis ended up like most gangsters of that era. He had a chance to start over with a clean slate, but his craving for a luxurious lifestyle ultimately cost him his life. This story could make a good crime drama, reminding us once again that when you go down the dark road, there's a good chance you'll end up in an early grave.